Hi, I'm Paige Rancourt. I'm with Michael Marsh, and we're going to talk about why you should vote for him for Secretary of State.
So why are you voting for me?
I'm voting for you because I've worked with you for a while, you know, and I agree with a lot of your point of views, political wise, and I feel like you'd make a great Secretary of State. But yeah.
Thank you, Paige. One thing I think is very important is that people understand what the Secretary of State's job is.
Right.
You know, like one of the main reasons I chose to run for Secretary of State is because one of the candidates, Brad Avakian, he's promising to misuse the office, but how many people actually know what the office is supposed to do?
Right.
And for instance, he wants to audit private companies. Okay, now there is an audit division of the Secretary of State's office, but its job is to audit the government. You know, we're giving them billions of dollars. What are they doing with it?
Right.
You know, and the job isn't to, it's basically a record-keeping job. It's an administrative position for the most part. Now, there is a policy area on the Land Use Board, which Secretary of State and the governor and the state treasurer, they all sit on a board. And the purpose of the Land Use Board was for the using of Oregon lands that were set aside to provide for education and for the paying for the government. You know, there was no income tax until 1930. And so that's the position. So they set up they set aside land to be developed. And I've talked with Dennis Richardson, the Republican, and I believe he would do an honest job. Yeah, I think he'd be a good Secretary of State. I've also had Sharon Durbin, the Libertarian candidate, on my program. I think he may have helped me with them. And Alan Zindel, the Green Party candidate. And while I would have differences with those last two on land use, I believe that either of them would be a honest Secretary of State. They would do the job honestly. And in fact, I thought about dropping out for a while, but because I do think they would do a good job, and yeah. But I look at the national race, and I'm looking at what's going on nationally, and it's really come down to Trump and Hillary. And under either one of them, things could go south. Yeah, and Trump's personality, yeah, he could misuse the office, and with Hillary's ideology, she will definitely misuse the office, which is why I'm voting for Trump, because I'll go with, I prefer what might as to what will.
Right.
Well, that's one of the reasons. And plus, I think Hillary's more likely to start rounding people up and putting them into concentration camps than Trump is. And unfortunately, they've already legalized that concept.
Oh, they have?
Yeah, the Military Reauthorization Act of 2012 that gives the federal government the power to round people up and put them in concentration camps without due process.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, which is the reason why I'm voting for Aaron Howard to be governor. Yeah,
Right.
like Bud Pierce, I think he's a good person, and I think he'd do a much better job than Kate Brown. But he doesn't really understand state sovereignty. Aaron Brown understands that if things go south at the national level, he can tell the federal government, no, you're not going to act stupid here in Oregon. You're not going to be mistreating the citizens of Oregon. Yeah, and whether you agree with him on other policies or not, that is very important.
Right.
Yeah. And Kate Brown has already shown that she's willing to support federal atrocities, like when she encouraged the federal government to murder one of the protesters in Eastern Oregon recently, earlier this year. So that's very important to have somebody that's going to say, hey, no atrocities here in Oregon.
Right.
And that's where Adenauer comes in. I think Bud Pierce would be opposed to it, but I'm not sure he understands that he has the actual authority to say no. You know, and that's a major problem. But yeah, you have to know that you can say no.
Right.
Yeah, like a lot of people were upset with what happened at Waco back, maybe before you were born. In what, 95 or something like that?
Yeah, I was born in 96, so it would be right before I was born.
Yeah, but the feds went in, and they murdered 85 men, women, and children. 17 of those children were under the age of 17.
Oh.
And it started out with the BATF raid. And the leader of the compound that was being attacked, he called 911. He called the local sheriff. But the sheriff didn't understand that he had the authority to put a stop to it, which he did. You know, the sheriff does have that power. And so it ended up, like I said, 85 men, women, and children being murdered by the feds.
Wow.
And nobody understood. The governor didn't understand. The sheriff didn't understand that they had the authority to say, no, don't be doing this.
Right.
And, but, you know, people have been learning, and, you know, a couple of years ago, the feds moved into Texas. They were going to attack a farm there, a rancher. And the governor said, no, leave them alone, go away. Yeah, and they did. Yeah, but you have to understand that you have that power.
Right.
And too many people don't, you know, even in government, they don't really understand what the authority is, which is why what Brad Avakian is so dangerous, because if people don't know what his job actually is, you know, he can misuse his office, and he can completely destroy our economy, which is what he plans to do.
Right.
Yeah. So I would urge people to start learning what the jobs are, like Secretary of State. And because that way you know if you're saying you're going to do something, and it's not their job to do that, then don't elect them.
Right.
The offices were set up the way they are for a reason. And for the most part, it was a good reason. I kind of like what Benjamin Franklin said about our U.S. Constitution. He said, it's not a perfect document, but it's as good as you're going to get from a group of human beings. And he was right. And so people need to know what the job is. And, you know, for instance, we're in charge of the elections division.
Right.
There's a couple of laws that Kate Brown, our current governor, pushed through the legislature when she was the Secretary of State that need to be overturned. One is the law that allows the county clerks to keep unused ballots after the election. Now,
Okay.
yeah. Now, originally the law said as soon as the election was over that night, destroy the ballots. Multnomah County got caught keeping the ballots and, filling them in, and which was illegal at the time. So
Well, yeah, it should be.
yeah. So instead of punishing the Multnomah County Clerk's office, they changed the law. Now the law needs to be changed back.
Right.
And if a county clerk gets caught doing that, that county clerk should lose their job.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're rigging elections. And, if you can't trust the vote counters, pretty soon it's over.
Right.
Because we do have a democratically representative form of government. And if the democracy part isn't honest, you're not going to have the representation either.
True.
And it's very dangerous. So I would change that law, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
And the other law that she pushed through is the voter motor law, that they're automatically registering people to vote when they get a driver's license or whatever, which gives the county clerks more ballots, which is what it's for. But also, the reason I don't like it is, okay, it takes 30 seconds to register to vote.
Yeah.
If they're registering somebody to vote who's not willing to take that 30 seconds, what kind of voter are they going to be?
Not gonna be a good voter.
No, yeah.
Fill in the boxes.
And if they're not willing to take that time to register on their own, okay, what happens? Okay, like Measure 97, for instance.
Yeah.
It's a 2% tax on sales, people doing business with $25 million or more. And the government unions who are pushing it say, we need to make the big corporations pay their fair share. Okay, now if you're not really paying attention, you say, yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
The international banks and corporations should be paying more. But two studies, one by the legislature, when it first came out, and the budget office, the financial office said, okay, if you pass this law, 38,000 people are going to lose their jobs. And the government unions who were pushing the bill, they didn't like that result, so they hired some economists from Portland State to do their study for them. And they were being paid by the government unions who were supporting the measure. And they came to the same conclusion. You're going to have at least 38,000 people lose their jobs. Okay, now the Democrats say, well, we need this money for education, seniors, I'm a senior, for health care and all that. That sounds really good. Okay, so what are you going to do about the 38,000 people that are losing their jobs?
Right.
They're in a desperate situation. And many of them are Democrats. The people that are, they're voting to fire themselves. And so the money isn't going to go to fixing our education system. It's not going to go for health care. It's going to be help these people survive. It has to. Yeah. So you just create a bigger bureaucracy, and you're doing more harm than good.
Right.
But if a person doesn't actually study the issues, take the time, all they know is what the government's saying. Oh, we've got to make the corporations pay their fair share. Okay.
Yeah.
But there's also, you got to learn more. Like 38,000 people that are going to lose their jobs.
Right.
And I'm afraid that the automatic people that are registered to vote aren't going to take that time. And Bradavakian, he wants to anybody that has any kind of dealings at all with the state should be registered. Now, personally, I think anybody that has dealings with state better be registered so
Yeah.
they can go and say, hey, you're working for me. I'm going to vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, that is real smart. But again, you know, automatically registering people is a bad idea.
Yeah.
Now, Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders have both said that, you know, our economy is rigged. And both offered ideas on how to fix it. And, you know, they're right. Okay, 6 of the 10 richest counties in America are suburbs of Washington, D.C. But unlike, you know, Bernie Sanders and, you know, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and some of these people, they say it's because of capitalism. Okay, that's not capitalism. That's corruption. And corruption happens in every system of government. If there's
Right.
people involved, there's going to be corruption. And the founders of this country understood that. That's why they created a small government, because the bigger the
Right.
government, the more it's going to be corrupt. And now we have a really big government, and it's really corrupt. And that's one of the reasons that, you know, like if I'm elected, one of the jobs is auditing. Now, Bradavakian wants to misuse that auditing power to go after private corporations, which is not part of the job. And I'm afraid he's going to destroy companies if he doesn't like the philosophy of the owner or whatever, you know, because he has that history as industries man, and labor and industry head. But it is very important to audit the government, and that is the job of the Secretary of State. That is the actual job, to audit these agencies, say, okay, you've gotten all this money, what are you doing with it? What is the result? And if you're not getting the results that you want, why not?
Yeah.
You know, like Cover Oregon now. What do they spend? Several $100 million, and the website didn't work.
Oh.
No, I couldn't put up a website. I'm not that technological. But I know people that can.
Right.
And they could have done it for less than the what, $300 million. And it would have worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, and they had several years to put it together. I think it was, what, 2 or 3 years, yeah.
That's a long time.
You know, about $300 million. And, you know, the website doesn't work. Hello. Yeah, and they made plans for a bridge up in the Portland area, going from Portland to Vancouver. Been about $400 million making the plans. The bridge didn't even get started, much
Wow.
less made. You know, and they spent all this money. You know, where did it go?
Right.
And so that is a very important part of the Secretary of State's job, to say, okay, we're spending this money, what are we getting for our money? And if we're not getting anything, why not? And is it time to, you know, cut our losses, or should I recommend it to the Attorney General to prosecute somebody and put some of these people in jail, which is where a lot of them belong, to be honest. I mean, if you're building a website that doesn't work and you spent $300 million, yeah,
Yeah.
somebody should be in jail. But instead, you know, and That's why, if you want an honest government, you also need an honest attorney general. Because what our current attorney general did was hired a Portland law firm that makes donations to Democrat causes, politicians. They got a few $100 million of taxpayer money, and then they settled. Yeah, and the Attorney General's office, they've got the largest law firm in the state. There's no reason for what they did. So, I would urge people to find out what the job description is for every position.
Right.
That's why I'm talking to you about Secretary of State's office. What is it that we are supposed to do? And coughing isn't one of them, but it probably will be. The Land Use Board is probably one of the things that jobs that I would be a little bit different than the other candidates. Because they would pretty much leave everything as a natural forest. And I support that, but I would like to see a lot of the land that the federal government has be returned to Oregon, for one thing. I would be an advocate for that. When they set up these federal wilderness areas, they promised to pay for education of some of these local communities in these areas that were relying upon the timber, and the federal government isn't paying. They haven't been for a long time. They made the promise, but they haven't kept their promise.
Right.
So give the land back. And plus, like I said earlier, a lot of land was set aside for the state of Oregon to use, mostly for educational purposes, to make sure the schools have funding. What I would like to do is, for instance, there's a piece of land that the state is selling off right now. Now, I would not sell any of the land, but I would allow it to be used. If a timber company wants to come in and cut it down, trees, as long as they replant it and make sure the habitat is good, as good or better when they're done as it is now. I'd be willing to do that, but I wouldn't sell the land itself, because 20 or 30 years from now, we might want to use that resource again.
Right.
And trees do regrow. That is a nice thing about nature. Now, Avakian, he's talking about, using solar panels and all this stuff. And while solar energy works on a small scale, for a house and stuff like that, there's no evidence that we are at the technological stage to have these massive.
Right. My dad sells them, but he's always like, they don't work. She's like, solar panels, like small ones, they get the job done. But I mean, like, there's a lot of places too, Oregon, we don't get a lot of sun.
Yeah.
Solar panels don't work, like the speedometers that the police put up.
Yeah.
Half the time they're out because there's no sun. I'm like, doesn't work that well.
Yeah,
But yeah.
They would definitely need to be able to store it.
Yeah,
for
that's
one
the
thing,
too,
and then
can't store 'em.
And even when they have the sun, it's not cost effective yet.
Right.
And to have a solar farm, that's ridiculous. You know, I would not let Oregon land be used that way. And I would also be opposed to using the windmills, which they advise, you know, for one thing, they kill birds, and I like birds. But again, you know, they're not really cost effective. You know, they cost more than what I believe they're worth.
Right.
And but even if they were cost effective, I would still prefer the birds. But we do need the energy.
Right.
And like in southern and central Oregon, they have geothermal capabilities, and I would definitely be willing to use that. So, any more questions you have about Secretary of State's job?
No, I think I know all of it, but you know, what got you into politics?
Well, I know that, you know, when I was growing up, it was a lot better, yeah, than it is now. You know, my mom stayed home to take care of myself and my sister, and my dad worked in a factory. And we had a nice car. We had our own home and all that. And it was pretty nice. And probably 80% of the people in this country lived a nice lifestyle like that. Now there were the super rich and the 10%, and there were 10% that were in poverty. But 80% were living really good. And it's kind of gone down.
Right.
And it's been deliberate, you know, by the policy both of the Democrat and the Republican Party, which is why I'm in the Constitution Party.
Right.
The Democrats with their regulations and their taxes, and Republicans with their, by allowing, setting up trade deals that really allow companies to go elsewhere and then sell the product back here. They can make more money by doing that than by hiring Americans. You know, I think, you know, I believe in trade, but we need trade policies that benefit the American people, not just the international banks and corporations.
Right.
And neither the Democrat or the Republican Party is willing to do that. Yeah. And also, most of the problems that we have are because the government has gotten away from the Constitution. You know, the government has a role to play in our life. But the things that they're supposed to do, like protecting us and securing our borders, they're not doing. Things that they have no business getting involved in at all, you know, like abortion and, quote, you know, gay marriage and all that. That's not the government. That's none of the government's business. Either one of those. And they're doing these things, and they're wasting a lot of our money. They're taking all this money, and you know, what do we have to show for it? Yeah, and it's because they're doing what they think is right rather than going by what the Constitution says they're supposed to do.
Right.
And we're out of time.
We are out of time.
I thank you for coming on and listening to me. And
thanks for having me.
glad.